So last time we talked about prototyping and playtesting. Today we're going to talk about developing your game. So when we're talking about game development, I think we should talk a little bit about, I guess this is a bit of design philosophy, bottom-up or top-down design. And what that means is if we imagine a tree, one way to approach the tree is growing it. So starting with a seed and it growing into a tree. The other way is you have a tree that's already grown and then you just trim it into something smaller. So if we take the top-down approach, maybe we have a bunch of mechanics that we've put together. So we decide we're going to make a deck building game that features a map and a fluctuating market. And then we'll play the game and we'll realize, all right, maybe the map isn't a big part of the game. We'll change the map. How about we make the map into a track? And maybe deck building isn't the best choice here, so we'll change it into card drafting, and so on. So you start with a couple of ideas, you make them into a game, and then you clean up the game. Bottom-up approach is when you start with something small. So let's say we start with deck building. And then we realize, all right, this is cool. Where do we want to go from here? Maybe we want to add a fluctuating market. All right, to get those two working together, where else can we go? Maybe we can add some objectives so that players have a bit of player interaction. Where else do we want to go? All right, well, now maybe we want to add a map with some area control and so on. So it's starting with something simple and kind of adding to it. Both approaches work. I know people that work really well as kind of building up. I am more that sort, but when I work with co-designers, I work really well with people who throw a bunch of ideas out there because I love developing, right? I love cutting out and changing things to make them work when I already have something. So I do like working a lot with people who do this. So for development, the main place where you're gonna get your information is by watching people play. And in most cases, we mentioned it a little bit last time, what is intuitive is most often the correct thing. So, for instance, I had a dice manipulation game a while ago, and what we had was players would roll their dice, and we had players choose a slot in which to place their die. That slot does something based on what the die is, and they gain a reward, right? So that's great, right? But what we had players do in our first version was we had players place all three of their dice, then stop, gain all three of their rewards, and do the whole thing again. So that was kind of the round. But what we realized very quickly is that players didn't do it that way. What players would do is players would roll their three dice, choose one die to place, gain the reward, and whatever that reward is, it could help them with the next die, and they would get a really nice, really satisfying combination of, first of all, you have a quicker loop, but second of all, you have a satisfying combo. If I place my die here, I'm going to get this, I'm going to use it to re-roll my other die, I'm going to place that other die, I'm going to use the reward that I gained to change the next die, and so on. So basically, if you find that players are just assuming something works in a specific way, you can lean into that, and that makes it really easy. So when watching playtests, look out for how do people think the game plays. You can use that and make that into a good aspect of the game. My main piece of advice for development is the same as advice for editing, because development is a lot like editing, right? You take a sentence and often you'll try and condense that sentence to say the most with the fewest words, right? And in editing, there's a really famous saying which goes, "Kill your darlings." And this is where I see a lot of people struggle when it comes to developing their games, is that they don't want to cut out things that they've put in the game. But it's not only gonna make your game better, it's gonna help you diagnose it. You can put those things back in, but you'll find very often you won't. So don't get too precious about the ideas you put in. As a game developer or game designer, you need to make a lot of decisions, right? The players need to have interesting decisions, but you need to make a lot of decisions about what the game wants to be. And my favorite thing about the word decision is that it actually means something in Latin. And what it means is de, meaning off, and I believe it's cedere, meaning to cut. So to cut off. So in making a decision, that means you're cutting something off, right? If you have many paths, in choosing one path, you are cutting off the other paths. Another little bit of Latin, and I learned this from comic book writer Alan Moore. He says, solve coagula, which he actually uses in the comic book Watchmen, if you're familiar with that. Solve coagula from Latin means to deconstruct and reconstruct. And the reason we want to use this, and the reason this is useful, is taking apart your game, just looking at the smallest elements of it, will tell you a lot about it, and you will be able to decide which parts feel clunky, how you want to shape the game, and so on, or at least you're going to learn more about it. Next time we will talk about pacing and progression and finish up this little series on game design.